Your work here has been mediocre at best, Julian announced, his voice slicing through the quarterly review meeting. 32 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The projector hummed, casting my name and performance metrics across the wall behind the new vice president. 5 years of dedication reduced to a red downward arrow on a slide. I do not see evidence of any meaningful contribution, despite your tenure, he continued, lingering on the word as if it were a formal accusation. My throat constricted in disbelief. 72 projects successfully delivered. More than half the company daily operations relied on systems I had created from nothing. Julian Thorne had been our vice president of operations for exactly 18 days. Perhaps, he said, tapping his gold watch against the polished conference table, it is time you moved on. Someone gasped quietly near the door. Clara Higgins from accounting tried catching my eye with a sympathetic glance. On the far side of the conference room, our chief executive officer, Charles Pierce, studied his tablet, apparently fascinated by whatever was on the screen. I have reviewed historical metrics, Julian continued, flipping to the next slide. Your output lags behind newer team members with half your experience. Your initiatives lack innovation. Your technical solutions are uninspired. Each word landed like a physical blow against my chest. I had stayed late countless evenings perfecting those uninspired solutions while Charles built the company reputation on their absolute reliability. We need visionaries, Julian said, gesturing toward 3 junior developers who joined 4 months ago. People who understand modern approaches. I glanced around the silent room. These people had called me at midnight when systems crashed. They had celebrated birthdays with me, sent cards when my mother passed away. Now they stared at their notepads, their keyboards, anywhere but my face. I stood slowly, gathering the strange icy calm that comes when your world implodes. The silence stretched as I surveyed the room. Finally, my gaze settled on Charles, who had finally looked up from his tablet. You will understand my value soon, I said, the words falling quietly into the silent room. Something shifted briefly in Charles' expression. Uncertainty, perhaps recognition, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Julian smirked, unimpressed. Be gone by sundown, he added with a dismissive wave of his hand. I gathered my belongings in a cardboard box under IT security watchful eyes. 5 years of work and memorabilia reduced to a pitiful collection. Evelyn Miller from Human Resources hovered nearby, clutching my termination papers. This is not right, Daniel, she whispered. Everyone knows what you have built here. I signed where indicated, my signature steady. Apparently, not everyone. Concerned colleagues paused by my desk as I packed. Who will manage the international connections? Liam asked anxiously. What about the quality standard system? Sophia Brooks added. Nobody else understands how it works. I gave a slight, resigned nod. That is a question for leadership now. Charles watched from the glass-walled executive suite as I walked out. No conversation about transition. No recognition of departing knowledge. 5 years of institutional memory simply walking away. I kept my spine straight until the elevator doors closed. Only then did my hands begin to tremble. My name is Daniel Vance, and until 2 hours ago, I was the systems integration specialist at Apex Dynamics, a company I helped build from a struggling startup to an industry leader. Not that anyone would know it from my title or my paycheck. I am the person who solves problems nobody else can figure out. The one who creates solutions so seamless they become invisible. The worker who stays until midnight, not for recognition, but because leaving something broken is simply not in my nature. My apartment felt strange that afternoon. Too quiet, too bright. For 5 years, I had only seen it in the early mornings and late evenings. Now, sunshine poured through windows at 2 o'clock on a Thursday, highlighting dust on surfaces I had never had time to notice. I poured myself a glass of water and simply breathed. The story of how I ended up at Apex Dynamics began at a tech conference where I met Charles Pierce, an ambitious entrepreneur with big ideas but practical limitations. His startup struggled with integration issues. His development team built impressive individual features, but they did not work together cohesively. What you need is not flashier features, I told him after his presentation. You need someone to make your existing pieces function as a unified whole. He hired me the next day. I was employee number 9. In those early years, I tackled challenges that others avoided. My solutions worked so well that they became invisible. Foundations everyone expected to function. When we landed our first major client, it was my middleware that enabled their legacy systems to communicate with our platform. When we expanded internationally, I created the translation matrices that allowed seamless operation across multiple languages and regulatory frameworks. When our server infrastructure repeatedly crashed under growing demand, I redesigned our entire approach to scaling. None of these achievements came with public recognition or accolades. That was not my role. While others presented flashy front-end features, I ensured everything actually worked. My value was in reliability, not spectacle. As the company grew, new management layers formed between me and senior leadership, people who did not understand what I had built or how crucial it was to daily operations. People like Julian. He arrived from a competitor with grand promises of transformation and next-level thinking. His first act was evaluating every department for optimization opportunities. His second was systematically dismissing anyone whose contributions were not immediately visible on quarterly reports. I became an obvious target. My salary represented 5 years of modest increases. My projects rarely generated direct revenue. They enabled other teams to succeed. On paper, to someone who did not understand our systems, I looked dispensable. For weeks after my departure, I rediscovered forgotten pleasures. I watched sunrises with hot coffee instead of debugging code under artificial lights. I reconnected with friends who had stopped inviting me places because I was always working. I remembered how life felt beyond corporate walls. Then, predictably, the messages started arriving from former teammates. The international portal keeps crashing. Nobody knows why. The quality standards automation is giving bizarre results. Julian is furious. Half the development team is working weekends, trying to figure out your systems. It was not through any deliberate sabotage or withheld information. I had documented everything meticulously, but because truly effective systems require something beyond written instructions. They require the contextual understanding that exists only in their creator mind. Waking up without anxiety felt strange after so many years. I started taking walks in the morning, applied for positions at companies where my skills might be valued, and even considered starting my own consultancy. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "You should see what is happening here," she wrote, sending a link to a business news article. Apex Dynamics had missed its quarterly targets by a substantial margin. An important client had publicly complained about system failures. Their stock had dropped 12% in a single day due to unforeseen technical challenges. Charles explained to concerned stakeholders in a quote that he felt no satisfaction in their struggles. These were people I had worked alongside for years, friends whose livelihoods depended on the company's success, but I also felt no responsibility to rescue them from a situation they had created. 2 weeks later, I received an interview offer from Apex Dynamics' main competitor, Vanguard Tech. The role came with a director title and nearly a 60% increase from my previous salary. I scheduled it for the following Monday. That Sunday evening, my phone displayed Charles' number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Daniel," he said, his typically confident voice subdued. "How are you?" "Surprisingly well," I replied honestly. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "We have encountered some difficulties," he finally continued. "I have heard the vice president who made that unfortunate decision is no longer with us." Julian had lasted less than 2 months. I felt a flicker of vindication, but kept my voice neutral. "That is unfortunate." The silence hung between us, heavy with unspoken tension. I listened to Charles breathing on the other end of the line, waiting. I would let him work for this conversation. "We need your expertise," he finally admitted. "The board has authorized me to make a substantial offer for your return." I sat at my kitchen counter tracing patterns in the condensation on my water glass. 5 years of dedication erased in a 15-minute meeting, and now they wanted me back because things were falling apart. "What is your offer?" I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. He named a figure 15% higher than my previous salary, a modest title upgrade, and potential equity options after a year. "That is interesting," I replied, "but insufficient. Daniel, be reasonable." "I was reasonable for 5 years, Charles." reasonable about my compensation, reasonable about credit for my work, reasonable when you brought in Julian without consulting anyone who actually understood our operations. My voice remained calm, but each word carried the weight of accumulated grievances. I am done being reasonable. I stated my requirements. Double my previous compensation, executive authority over technical operations, and public acknowledgement of my historical contributions to the company. That is considerable, he responded, discomfort evident. Actually, it is entirely fair, I replied. You are not paying for future work. You are compensating me for what I have already created that nobody else understands fully. The board will never accept, he sighed. Then find someone else to fix your systems, I interrupted. Though I suspect you have already tried and failed. Another long pause. I could almost feel him calculating the cost of continued failures against meeting my demands. I have an interview with Vanguard Tech tomorrow, I added, mentioning their biggest competitor. Their offer is quite generous already. Do not make any decisions until Wednesday, he said quickly. I need to convene the board. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the window. The man looking back seemed different, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer. 7 days ago, I might have accepted that initial offer with gratitude. Now I understood my true worth. The interview with Vanguard Tech went exceptionally well. Their technical director actually understood my contributions to Apex Dynamics systems. He had been trying to replicate several of them for years. They offered a director position on the spot with a comprehensive package that nearly matched my demands to Charles. We need an answer by Thursday, the Vanguard Chief Executive Officer said, shaking my hand. Tuesday passed without word from Apex Dynamics. Wednesday morning arrived with silence. By afternoon, I began mentally preparing for life at Vanguard Tech. Then at 3:15 in the afternoon, Charles called. We accept your terms, he said without preamble. All of them. I felt a curious mixture of vindication and unexpected sadness. Send over the paperwork, I replied. There is one additional request, he added. The board wants you to start immediately, tomorrow if possible. Tuesday, I countered. I need time to prepare. Things are urgent, Daniel. They became urgent the moment Julian decided I was dispensable, I replied. Tuesday is quite soon enough. The employment contract arrived within the hour, double my previous salary. Senior Vice President of Technical Operations, a seat on the executive leadership team, public acknowledgement of my contributions. Everything was in writing, signed by Charles and the board chairman. I signed and returned it, then poured myself a glass of water in celebration, not of returning to Apex Dynamics, but of finally being valued appropriately. The announcement circulated Tuesday morning. My return was described as a critical leadership acquisition with detailed acknowledgement of my essential historical contributions to Apex Dynamics' core infrastructure. Every person who had witnessed my dismissal received this message alongside news of my executive package and reporting structure. Walking into the building felt surreal. The same security guard greeted me, but instead of my old badge, he handed me an executive access card. The same elevator carried me upward, but I exited on the executive floor rather than the technical department. The same people nodded as I passed, but their expressions carried new respect, or perhaps it was weariness. Evelyn Miller from HR met me at the door to my new office, an actual office with windows, not the cubicle I had occupied for years. Welcome back, she said, her smile genuine. Your team is assembled in the main conference room, whenever you are ready. My team? Yes, the Technical Operations Division. 16 people total, including the new hires Charles approved this weekend. She handed me a folder. Their profiles are all here. You have complete authority to reorganize as you see fit. The reality of my new position began sinking in. This was not just about fixing what had broken in my absence. This was actual leadership authority. In conference room A, nervous faces greeted me. Some familiar colleagues, some new hires, all waiting to see who exactly I had become after my public dismissal and triumphant return. Good morning, I began, surveying the room. Most of you know me, some do not. For 5 years, I built and maintained the systems that form the backbone of this company. Now we are going to rebuild what has been broken and create something stronger. Liam raised his hand tentatively. Is it true the Project Zenith failed completely after you left? Project Zenith, our largest client implementation, had been my last major architecture before Julian arrived. It did not fail, I corrected. It was failed by poor leadership decisions that removed its principal architect without transition planning. I opened my tablet and projected the current system status. Now, let us examine the systems we must repair. The first week passed in a blur of diagnostics and repairs. Critical systems had degraded without proper maintenance. Stopgap fixes had created new problems. Half-implemented changes initiated under Julian had corrupted core functions. By Friday, we had stabilized the most urgent issues. I worked alongside my team, hands-on with the code, showing rather than telling. When we resolved the issues plaguing Project Zenith at 8 o'clock Friday night, spontaneous applause broke out in the development room. "First round's on me," I announced, and we relocated to a nearby restaurant to celebrate. Sophia Brooks clinked glasses with me as the others chatted excitedly about plans to rebuild the international portal. "You know what is strange?" she said quietly. "Charles has not interfered once. Not a single executive directive or modification request." "That was in my contract," I replied. "Complete technical autonomy." "Smart," she nodded. "But that is not all of it. He seems different since you returned. Watchful, almost nervous. I considered this. Executives do not like being proven wrong publicly." "Maybe." She studied me. "What are you really after, Daniel? Revenge for how they treated you?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. What did I want? The validation of returning, the satisfaction of proving my worth, or something deeper? "I want what I have always wanted," I finally answered. "To build something that works properly." But as I said it, I recognized the half-truth. There was something else brewing beneath my calm exterior. A plan was forming that I had not fully acknowledged, even to myself. The second week brought my first executive leadership meeting. I sat at the gleaming conference table, now a peer to those who had previously barely acknowledged my existence. Charles presided with his usual charisma, but I noticed how his gaze frequently darted to me throughout the presentations. The chief financial officer presented quarterly projections showing recovery after the recent troubles. The vice president of sales detailed renewed client confidence. The chief marketing officer outlined aggressive plans to regain market share lost during the system's failures. And now, Charles said, "I would like our new senior vice president of technical operations to share his assessment and plans." All eyes turned to me, some curious, some wary, some openly skeptical. The weight of expectation hung in the air. I opened my presentation slowly, methodically, not with technical diagrams or recovery metrics, but with a 5-year timeline of Apex Dynamics growth. Each major client acquisition, each significant feature launch, each technological breakthrough. Beside each milestone, I displayed the underlying technical architecture that had made it possible. Systems I had designed and implemented largely without credit. Our recent failures were not accidents, I explained calmly to the board. They were the inevitable result of removing the person who understood how these interconnected systems function as a whole. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Charles' expression remained carefully neutral. Moving forward, I continued, we have two choices. We can patch the existing systems, a temporary solution that will require constant maintenance, or we can rebuild properly with appropriate resources and recognition for the architects. "What is your recommendation?" asked the chief financial officer. "Rebuilding is the only sustainable path," I replied, "but it requires something Apex Dynamics has historically lacked. Transparency about who creates value and appropriate compensation for their contributions." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. "Are you proposing structural changes beyond your department?" Charles asked carefully. "I am proposing a culture change," I answered, meeting his gaze directly. "One that prevents us from ever again discarding someone whose value we have failed to recognize." The tension in the room was palpable. I had pushed boundaries, made implicit criticisms explicit, but something told me this was merely the opening move in a larger game, one where I finally held cards worth playing. As we adjourned, Charles asked me to remain behind. The door closed, leaving us alone in the large conference room. "That was quite a presentation," he said, his tone unreadable. "Just establishing context," I replied. He studied me for a long moment. "What is your actual plan here, Daniel?" Beyond the contract terms and system repairs, I met his gaze steadily. You will understand that soon enough." His expression flickered with something between concern and curiosity. "I am beginning to think bringing you back might have unexpected consequences." "Most valuable things do," I replied simply, gathering my materials. "See you tomorrow, Charles." As I walked to my office, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk about what really happened with Julian. Not everyone at Apex Dynamics is who they appear to be. Meet me at Riverside Park, 6 o'clock tonight. Come alone." I stared at the cryptic message, my fingers hovering over the screen. Anonymous messages inviting people to locations rarely ended well in movies. Then again, Riverside Park was hardly secluded. It was a popular evening spot filled with joggers and dog walkers until well after dark. Curiosity won. If someone had information about Julian that they could not share inside Apex Dynamics walls, I needed to hear it. The spring evening was mild, cherry blossoms scattering across the walking path as I approached our meeting spot. I had chosen casual clothes, jeans and a light jacket, wanting to appear approachable rather than in executive mode. A woman sat alone on a bench overlooking the water, her profile vaguely familiar, though I could not immediately place her face. As I approached, she turned and recognition clicked into place. Audrey Cole, Charles' executive assistant for the past 2 years. "Thank you for coming," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I was not sure you would. Your message was intriguing," I replied, taking a seat on the bench. "What is this about Julian?" She pulled a small tablet from her bag, her fingers trembling slightly as she unlocked it. "Julian did not choose you for dismissal at random, and he was not just incompetent. He was deliberately sabotaging specific projects." "Why would he do that?" I asked, skepticism edging my voice. "Because he never actually worked for Apex Dynamics," she said, handing me the tablet. "At least not exclusively." The screen displayed a private email thread between Julian and an external address. I scrolled through, my blood pressure rising with each message. Detailed reports on Apex Dynamics' proprietary systems, assessments of vulnerable points in our architecture, lists of key personnel to neutralize with my name at the top. "He was working for Vanguard Tech," I whispered, the realization crashing over me. "Corporate espionage." Audrey nodded gravely. "Not just gathering intelligence. Active sabotage. He was brought in to weaken Apex Dynamics from within, target key systems, remove essential personnel, and create openings for Vanguard Tech to exploit in the market. And Charles hired him without proper vetting." She hesitated, glancing around again before leaning closer. "That is where it gets complicated. The board insisted on Julian appointment, overriding Charles' concerns." "The board?" My mind raced through the consequences of this discovery. Why would they? "2 board members have investments in Vanguard Tech through shell companies," she explained. "I discovered it accidentally while preparing materials for last quarter board meeting." Keep scrolling. I swiped through more documents, financial records showing the connections, calendar invites for private meetings between Julian and 2 board members, and strategy notes outlining a controlled decline of Apex Dynamics' market position. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, suddenly wary. "Why not take it to Charles?" Her expression darkened. "Because I do not know who to trust anymore. Charles has been acting strangely since before Julian arrived. Closed-door meetings, encrypted communications. He claims he opposed Julian hiring, but I have seen messages suggesting otherwise." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. If this information was accurate, Apex Dynamics was not just suffering from poor management decisions. It was being deliberately undermined from within. "What do you want from me?" I asked Audrey. "You are the only executive without connections to either faction." She met my gaze directly. "Your systems keep this company running, and you have a personal stake in exposing whoever was behind your dismissal. I need an ally I can trust." I considered her words carefully. Trust was in short supply, and she was asking for mine with only digital evidence that could potentially be fabricated. "I will look into this," I said finally, "but I need time to verify this independently." She nodded, seemingly relieved. "That is all I ask. Be careful who you confide in." As I walked home, my mind churned with possibilities. If Audrey information was accurate, my return to Apex Dynamics had placed me in the center of a corporate war. My dismissal had been the strategic elimination of an obstacle. Over the next week, I rebuilt trust with my technical team while quietly gathering intelligence. I revamped security protocols under the guise of system improvements. I implemented tracking measures in key systems to monitor unusual access patterns. Then came the breakthrough. Late one evening, as I worked alone in my office, my monitoring alert pinged. Someone was accessing our client database using Charles' credentials at 9:15 in the evening, when Charles was verifiably at a charity event across town. I traced the access point to a private terminal in our secure development area. I pulled up the security camera feed and froze. There sat George Mercer, the chairman of the board, methodically downloading sensitive client information. I captured the footage and data trail, logging the activity in my secure private server. The next morning, Charles called an emergency meeting. "We have a situation," he announced. "Two of our top clients received solicitations from Vanguard Tech yesterday, offering migration services with insider knowledge of their configurations. I asked to speak to Charles privately. When the room cleared, I closed the door and showed him the logs. "Someone used your credentials last night to access client data," I said. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features. "That is impossible," he whispered. "My authentication requires biometric confirmation." Nevertheless, it happened. I have the footage showing George Mercer doing it. Charles sank into a chair, his expression troubled. He admitted he had known about the infiltration for months, but was gathering evidence slowly. I proposed a controlled test. "We create 3 bait projects: Project Falcon, Project Emerald, and Project Orion. Project Orion was made accessible to board members only. I embedded unique traceable markers in each project data structure. A week later, Project Orion was accessed at 2:10 in the morning from Mercer Terminal. By noon, elements of its proprietary algorithm appeared in a pitch. Vanguard Tech was preparing. We had our proof. I met Charles in the pale light of early morning. "We have definitive evidence of economic espionage under federal law, specifically Section 1832 of Title 18 of the United States Code. Mercer has also breached his fiduciary duty to Apex Dynamics. We can proceed together to expose them," I said. Charles nodded. "Let us do it." The board meeting began at 9 o'clock sharp. 10 members sat around the table, Mercer at its head. After standard agenda items, Charles stood. "I believe we have a matter of corporate governance to address." Mercer frowned. "This could wait." "Charles." "I am afraid not," Charles replied, nodding to me. I connected my tablet to the display. The screen illuminated with a single image showing Mercer accessing Project Orion at 2:10 in the morning. "What is this?" Mercer demanded. "Evidence," I replied calmly, "of systematic corporate espionage and sabotage." I methodically presented our findings: access logs, communication records, and the financial connections. I showed that my dismissal was not about performance, but about eliminating the person most likely to detect their vulnerabilities. External investigators and federal agents from the Department of Justice entered the boardroom, accompanied by corporate counsel. Mercer and 2 other implicated directors were escorted out for immediate questioning, their expressions a mixture of shock and defeat. The remaining directors sat in stunned silence, realizing how close the company had come to complete ruin. Charles outlined the transition plan. "Effective immediately, Mercer and the implicated directors are suspended. I will continue as Chief Executive Officer, and Daniel Vance will assume the position of Chief Operating Officer, with particular focus on restructuring our governance." We restructured both our technical systems and corporate governance from the ground up, establishing transparency initiatives, equitable recognition programs, and regular third-party audits to ensure compliance. This was essential to prevent any future exploitation of our core infrastructure. 3 months later, Apex Dynamics had transformed. Mercer and his co-conspirators were facing federal charges. Project Zenith was running flawlessly. In my new executive office, I sometimes reflected on the journey. My revenge had not been destruction. It had been rebuilding the company in my own image. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not what you destroy, but what you create in the aftermath of betrayal. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the end. If you enjoyed Daniel's journey from undervalued employee to powerful executive, please hit that like button and subscribe for more corporate revenge stories. Have you ever witnessed someone's contributions being overlooked until they were gone? Share your experiences in the comments below.